Hey everyone, welcome to the 2 month review. This is our 6th season of a weekly podcast in which we talk about a particular book, bit by bit, section by section. And this season we're going to be talking about the Book of Disquiet by, well, I have to pause myself. There we go. By Fernando Pessoa, and or by all the various writers that he invents to write his book. I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm here as always with Brian Wood.
Hi, Chad. We should do some shots to celebrate season 6.
Oh my God. No more.
Okay.
And Declan Spring from New Directions.
Hi, everybody.
Declan's joining us to introduce the Book of Disquiet. I am hungover because the National League wildcard was last night, and I love baseball, and I hate the Cubs, and I'm so excited that they lost. Domestic abusing pieces of shit. It's something we shouldn't say online, but I hate them, and that was the best game. And I think we should take a moment to say that Scott Oberg, this is all insider baseball, literally, but Scott Oberg struck out the last 4 batters of the game for the Rockies. His strikeout rate was less than 1 an inning during the regular season. So the Cubs did particularly poorly against Scott Oberg.
All right.
Oberg. Or words that no one said out loud.
I wish I could care less, but I don't know if I could, Chad. Sorry.
I'm so excited for this. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this book.
I was watching till the 9th inning, and then I couldn't stay up.
Don't. It was a bad idea. It was a bad idea.
Yeah.
That's why I'm late.
But tonight is an important game, in my book.
Tonight. So
Oakland.
Last season was all about the World Cup. This season is going to be all about baseball.
It's it's there versus Knopf tonight, which is weird because it's the same thing.
Fair enough. I think Oakland's going to win tonight.
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry, Declan. I think they're going to bullpen the shit out of this game, and they're going to win. Yeah,
anything can happen.
Because
we should just talk about baseball instead of Pessoa.
I would be happy to do that because I'm pretty sure that they're gonna use their opener, and they're gonna be able to use Blake Trinan really well. And I have a feeling that Aroldis Chapman's gonna blow this game. Mm-hmm. Those are my predictions. Week 1. Let's talk about this book.
Okay.
So, Declan.
Yes.
How did you guys come to publish the Book of Disquiet, this version of it?
Well, it all started right after Gregory Rabassa died. I went to his memorial service and gave a talk, and a lot of people were there. Esther Allen set it up brilliantly, and Peter Constantine was there, and Edith Grossman, and a lot of members from Rabassa's family, and it was a really wonderful celebration of him. And at the very end, someone named Patricio Ferrari came up to me, and he said, "I have a project for New Directions, and I think it would just be perfect for you guys. I'd really like to come and meet with you." So, I'm pretty busy, and I said, well, when we exchanged cards, and I thought we'd just talk by phone, but he was really insistent on coming in. So a month or so or 2 later, he came in armed with the Portuguese editions of Pessoa in the Book of Disquiet and all the various heteronyms and an anthology of the heteronyms. And he showed them to me, and they were just, they're really beautiful editions with all the facsimiles of the originals and very meticulously annotated with great scholarship in them. And he said, New Directions should do a library of Pessoa. And at that point, we had already brought out Book of Disquiet, or it was in production. And I think that's right. Or at least we decided to do it. And I'm sort of giving you a long answer to your question.
No, that's perfect.
I'm not answering it directly. So we ended up signing on with the Portuguese editors to do a library, basically, of Pessoa and his heteronyms. Not just the Book of Disquiet, but Ricardo Reis and Alberto Cairo and Navarro de Campos, and then this little anthology of Pessoa's heteronyms. So those are forthcoming, and Margaret Jull Costa is translating Cairo right now. But Book of Disquiet basically started because I think Margaret and Barbara are always talking about projects, and she's translated Asa de Queiroz for us, and she mentioned to him that she was working on this with Nick at Serpent's Tail, and Barbara said, wow, we'd love to do the US edition, and sure enough, we bought the rights to do it here, and it's just turned out to be a really successful book for us. So
that's pretty amazing. So like, had you read the Book of Disquiet in any other version before this one?
Well, I read the original. I read the early edition. That's basically a selection from Book of Disquiet that Serpent's Tail published. I forget what year that was.
It was like, I had it and I was going to bring it with me and I totally forgot because, hungover plus baseball. But yeah. I think it's like 1998.
Yes. And that's basically a selection. That's the one that I read quite a while ago. And Margaret translated that. And that's essentially a selection from the complete Book of Disquiet. And complete sort of a, he wrote so much, and there's certain little pieces that he wrote that you could maybe consider would be part of Book of Disquiet that were not included. But this selection was basically put together, edited by Maria Jose de Lancaster, who's Antonio Tabucchi's wife. And it's basically almost arranged thematically. And then Margaret translated the sort of selection for Serpent's Tail. This edition is based on the Portuguese complete edition. There are actually a couple of Portuguese editions that claim to be the definitive, but this was based on the Portuguese edition edited by Geronimo Pizarro,
who we're hoping to have on the podcast at a later point in time. Just to back up for anyone who's watching this who is not familiar with Fernando Pessoa, I'm going to summarize quickly his life, but you should fill in the details because my understanding is vague. But he was a writer who was born in Portugal in the late 1800s, moved away, came back by himself, and ended up writing is it 3 trunks, 2 trunks? It's like 30,000 pages of stuff. Or pages being loosely used here, because he'd write on like backs of note cards on whatever he could find. He would just keep writing, and nothing got published during his lifetime except for like 1 book of poems. But he wrote under 130 some different heteronyms, where he created these characters who were not him, had their own philosophy, their own style of writing, and he'd write under their names, and he put it all into trunks. And so when he died, there were like multiple trunks that existed, and there was there's reference within those, and probably within his correspondence, to something called the Book of Disquiet or Book of Anxiety or Book of whatever. I forget what the Portuguese word is, but it's like it's called
BOD. It would be labeled BOD on the cards.
Okay. Perfect.
Extract.
And so like when people went through it, like the Book of Disquiet wasn't published in Portuguese until like the 60s, 70s, 80s?
1982.
1982. So really late. Like he died in like the 40s, I believe, right?
He died in, I think, 35. He died before the war. Yeah.
So even earlier, yeah. So he died, years go by, they put out this book, but then they keep going through this trunk because he was like a valser sort of writer, right? Like where it's not like microscripts. Like Robert Valser wrote in like this particular sort of writing style, not in terms of prose, but in terms of like literally the figurative, the literal writing was almost unreadable. And Pessoa didn't do quite that, but he did write in like small, crazy texts and had trunks of shit that people had to sort through. So like the story that I've always heard that makes this very interesting to me as a book is that people were still going through his trunks and trying to figure out what was part of the Book of Disquiet, what was part of different pseudonyms, what's part of anything, and what does it say? Because it's not easy. It's not like you're just reading notebooks. You're reading like, whatever, like envelopes with like scratches on them.
Yeah. I think that's one of the beauties of the work, that it's not necessarily, it can never be called complete or definitive. And
Right.
you know, I think Pessoa himself envisioned creating his own edition, and if that had happened, we might not have as great a work. The whole sort of scrappy nature of it is, I think, one of the things that makes it great. You know, but
So I've seen this under poetry. I've heard it called prose. Some have it with the book, like it's a book. I mean, like what is this?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we're gonna talk about it for a while. How do we market this to people? How do we talk about it? What would you say?
Well, I mean, New Directions marketed it as, you know, one of the great, you know, literary works of the 20th century, and
Okay.
you know, it is such a monumental work, and the book was designed so beautifully with Peter Mendelssohn's design, and we did follow the Tinta de China Portuguese edition in creating the facsimiles and making it, you know, a nice object to look at. So, you know, the book won some design awards, and it was on the list at the end of the year for, you know, most beautiful covers, etc. And so, wait, what was your question?
No, I've seen it placed in poetry. Yeah.
Basically, more is like literature, I would say. You know, and when I first read it, I sort of expected it to be a novel and realized very quickly that it wasn't. And actually, when I had to work on this book, we got the proofs from the book from the British publisher Serpent's Tail, and my job as the editor was basically to read through those proofs and change Britishisms to English, American usage. But also,
I think we can just call it English.
Every once in a while,
basically ours now. What's ours?
Yeah, for sure.
And every once in a while, I would sort of stumble on a sentence or wonder about something, and so I had a list of queries that I sent to Margaret, and those were either agreed on or not. But one of the things that was challenging about doing that was that I had to sort of read it from beginning to end, you know, very carefully, almost like you would a novel or something. And I know a lot of people have gotten a lot out of just picking up the book and reading excerpts from it. You know, it's sort of like poetry in that way. You know, you pick up and read. It's such intense, dense writing, and so beautiful. But a lot of it, I think, sometimes can be enjoyed, not feeling like you need to read it from start to finish, but picking up and reading pages here or there. You know,
that's what our things.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. That's what our new marketing person, Anthony, who will probably be on one of these later podcasts. I don't think he's ever finished this book, but it's one of the books that he picks up and reads sections from time after time. So, yeah, and it is a finalist for the National Translation Award for Poetry, correct?
Oh, I don't. Oh, is it? I don't know. Really?
No. Look at you guys. Not even proud of being. Yeah, that A, false modesty. B, like if you're on an award list, you should own that. Like I would kill to have one of our books on one of these award lists, like the national.
Wait, which award is this?
The National Translation Award from Alta. I'm pretty sure it's a
final. Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
that one. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah,
I thought you said National Book Award. I was like,
no, that they don't include poetry. This include bad books. I mean, awesome books. We'll keep my feelings out of this. Let's go on, Brian. Sorry,
but I think one of the things I'm really interested digging into this was in the preface and introduction. One, like it seems like a book that could never be complete because there's how do we put it together, and then the translator having a hard time, like having to make up some words to get the right feeling across. So it can always be translated again. It can always be compiled. Like I like the idea that it's a living book in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's one of the weird things that I've read. The only edition I've read of this, I read part of Margaret's version from Serpent's Tail, which I own, And then I read the entirety of the Penguin Classics version that Richard Zenith translated probably in the early 90s as well, or late 90s. And that one I have still in my phone from like, I don't know how many years ago. I got invited to a festival in Lisbon, and I wrote down a bunch of like notes of the sections that I thought were the most interesting from the Book of Disquiet, none of which I think match up with this. Like it's from 2012. And I have like all the numbers and like what I thought was cool about them, like saved in my phone, but I don't think they match because that book was organized differently. So it's like,
yes,
and translated differently. So yeah, it's one of these books that's like a book that is amorphous in like every possible way that you could talk about it.
Right. Well, Richard Zenith, I've compared the translations, and I think they're just different. There's strengths and weaknesses to both. As far as I know, the Richard Zenith edition, he basically ordered. Pessoa wrote most of the Book of Disquiet. He took a break from it in 1920, and then in 1929 he picked it up again. And starting in 1929 is when he wrote sort of a lot of the core substance and what people consider to be some of the best, Lisbon later parts where, Bernardo Soares is really just, coming into it. And the Zenith basically took those that last part as his foundation, and then introduced earlier parts where he thought it would be appropriate.
Right.
Our edition really tries to be chronological, so it starts from the early excerpts and fragments with Vicente Guedes, the heteronym that he started with, and then basically Geronimo basically tried to create an edition that would start from the beginning and end with the last, the ultimate last. And there's problems with both. I mean, I think what's interesting about our book is that you can, and the New York Review of Books article brought this out, is that in reading chronologically, you can see the development of the work. Mm-hmm. It might not be as, the earlier parts, arguably are not as good as the later parts, but you can see how the work evolves, and that's, an interesting aspect to it.
Yeah.
We did that with
our edition also claims to be more complete. It includes more. I think Richard Zenith actually edited a later Portuguese edition that was published by Alviro and Alvim, and that edition he's more conservative and careful about what the originals really were to be included in the Book of Disquiet. So it's
sort of like
everyone does it different.
Quite analogous, but like sort of like the Anniversaries by Uwe Janssen that just came out, where Uwe Janssen had his version of it that should come out in English, which was like 700 pages, and the new version has 1,800 pages and is all the stuff that he left out. Yeah. Sorry, Brian, you were going to say something. I didn't mean to talk over you.
Oh, I'm really looking forward then going through chronologically, just the way we did with the short stories of Marcela Rodoreda, seeing how her early stories change from her later stories and how she evolves as an artist. So I'm glad you guys have it that way. That'll be really fun to see that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. The Vicente Guedes parts are more, he's more. He's not as in the world. He's a little bit more caught up in himself. He's a little bit more nihilistic. And he's also, so at that point was really influenced by, he was still, really under the influence of like all the symbolist writing and Gothic writing. So there's a lot of weird stuff in there about, sexless women and, these really weird rural landscapes in the beginning. And, that's interesting, but I do remember reading this and feeling that the later parts are really when, the Book of Disquiet is is what everyone says is the ultimate book about Lisbon, and
Yeah.
Pessoa is the Lisbon writer, great Lisbon writer, and that's what you sort of see as the book develops. Yeah.
And that's really just the second phase, which starts on page like 175, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Where it says like from the Book of Disquiet, composed by Bernardo Soares, the bookkeeper. Yeah, and that's the part that like the first section of that, the first numbered section, which is I guess 163. That's what I remember being like the beginning of other books. So yeah, so this will be interesting. This early stuff, I don't think I've read it, or at least if I have, it's been mixed in with the later Lisbon-centric section.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Here's a question for you. Again, putting you on the spot for like a marketing way, how would you pitch this book to people who are listening to this podcast and don't know much about Pessoa? Like I assume, Brian, you had never heard of Pessoa before we started talking about this. Or
no, I just learned where Lisbon was. That's in Portugal. So I'm catching up.
It's west of Croatia. They have one good soccer player. Their baseball team is not in the playoffs. But how would you pitch this to someone? Like, how would you describe this book as a book that would get someone who has never heard of Pessoa or the Book of Disquiet interested in wanting to read it and stay with us for like the next 10 weeks?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Okay.
You're the only one who can say that. Answer that.
Well, I think just what I said before, it's really one of the great works of 20th century literature. It's if you want to say that you've read, the great works along with, Ulysses and Samuel Beckett and Bernard and all these great 20th century writers, this is one you have to read as well.
I'm willing to bet you money that your sales reps do not say that.
Actually, we do. I mean, we have these sales presentations where we sort of emphasize that this is a pivotal, essential text, and every bookstore has to have it.
This is sort of a different question, but related to that. But like, is there any other press aside from New Directions that can pull that line? Like the way of being like, well, this is a great book and within the greatness of literature. Like most other presses can't say that and get away with it without it being like, whatever, we don't care. But you guys can, obviously, for a variety of reasons. Is there anyone else that can do that?
Well, I mean, if, Random House brings out War and Peace in the Pivar translations, or I'm sure they're all, or, Norton just did the, Mercado de Assis, I'm sure that they
no one cares.
Were, yeah.
Mercado de Assis, no one really, honestly, no one cares about him anymore, unfortunately. He's the best. But yeah, you guys have that reputation. You've built that over years. And over all the different books and different authors that you've published. And that's something that's like been earned and created like the sort of cultural capital that you can bring out something and say like, this is an important work and people will believe you wholeheartedly, which I think is something worth noting. And for anyone who's listening, I can't imagine that anyone listens to this and doesn't know who New Directions is, but if you are, that's New Directions is a place to go to for like great works of literature that are high quality across the board with no questions. Like there's no qualifications. Like Random House might bring out War and Peace, but they're also going to bring out some bullshit. Like most of it's bullshit. And then War and Peace pops up in a questionable translation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, New Directions, New Directions started in the 30s. James Laughlin started New Directions.
36.
And there always has been this sort of museum historical aspect to it, and that every book that we do sort of fits into this canon of modernist experimental literature. And, he had this philosophy about publishing that any book that's worth anything won't really be appreciated now, but will be appreciated 30 years from now. And we still sort of take that long-term view. And the idea is to, always be profitable, but also to publish lasting works of literature. And I think a lot of people sort of see New Directions as doing that. So maybe more than other publishers.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm excited. This is going to make me look a lot smarter at the next cocktail party I go to. So that's 90% of why I read, is not to look dumb at a cocktail party. So.
That's 90% of why everyone reads.
This will help.
Brian, you wanted to mention this cover is totally ripped off, or someone's ripped this cover off.
Oh, how could you not, though? I mean, it's so wonderful. I could see it definitely being a trendsetter.
What was the name of the book that you found?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
You thought I might find a picture of it.
There was a article on LitHub that had like the 12 best covers of September or something like that, and one of them was almost identical to this. And Brian sent it and was like, "This looks just like the Book of Disquiet." And then underneath it, like the description from the designer was basically like, "Yeah, we tried to rip off the Book of Disquiet. Like we wanted to make it look just like this because that book is really cool."
Right. But Peter Mendelssohn's he's really been doing some amazing covers for us. And one of the things that's been really, last couple of years especially, we've really seen more of our books in bookstores and reviewed. And I think that's due in part to the designers like Peter and Rodrigo and others who are really, Paul Saar, who are really doing amazing work for us. And our covers, I think, are really looking great these days.
I don't know who did what, but I like the Governesses cover. I don't like Compass. I stand by not liking the Compass cover. But I like the Governesses a lot.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover.
That one's one of my favorites of the recent books. And the Emissary, I think a lot of people like the cover of that.
Yeah, I like the cover.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of that book.
Open Letter is more of a, you're sort of going for more of a series look, right? Having a design of
like a sort of modernist
the same
overall
designer that I love. Yeah.
Which it has its pluses and minuses, I suppose.
Yeah. But some of them really stand out, almost looking like their own design, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that over time, like a lot of presses go through. There it is, Ponte.
Ponte by Simon and Schuster has a very.
It's like the same cover.
It's the same color scheme with some stuff over the face, and
the font is the same too.
The typeface. So it was very.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Very inspired.
A lot of presses, I was going to say, is a lot of presses seem to go through phases of like having books that look similar to each other or a series and then going away. Like there was that New Directions phase where there was like the black and I want to say it's black and orange, but like the spines all had like the same. I was like from the late 90s, early 2000s when I was working in the bookstore. Yeah, it would have been in the mid 1990s. Then there are a lot of those like paperbacks that had like a sort of rigorous setup to them, and then you guys went away from that, which seemed to, after you had gone through that phase, been able to move on to something else. Or there's even those white ones, the old like Isha de Queiroz books are all like the white with the red lines at the top.
Yeah,
and that was
a classics
too. Yeah. So there's like phases, I think, for a lot of presses that survive for, what is it now, 80 years? You guys have been around? 82?
Yeah, something like that. 98, almost. Yeah.
You guys are 1936 is what it says behind you. So
yeah.
So 82.
We did go through a period when I first started working here where our designers were more. They were extremely talented, incredible book designers, and usually the interior designers and the cover design. They did both the interior and the cover designers, and it was sort of pre-digital. And they'd come in to the office with these, with the proofs on these sort of, I forgot the term for it now, but they were printed on cardboard boards, and they were very mechanical, they did beautiful work, but it was more formulaic and very concise, and then. I think as things got more digital, we started using designers, separate cover designers from interior designers. And now, we use freelance designers to do our interior poetry designs. But a lot of the prose stuff is just done by Eric, our production director. He will just create proofs on this, here. And then the covers are where we really put a lot of our energy into the design.
I've become sort of obsessed with letting over the past few books I've read because I think that there's like a real, I feel like there's a law that people know that do design as to like what the size of the font is and the spacing on it versus how much the letting can be. And there's a ratio there that works out really well. And when books, which you never notice, and you should never notice, like anyone who's reading a book should never pay attention to the letting, but when it's wrong, you notice it immediately. And it makes that book really hard to read. Like there's visual cues that like interior designers know that like make a book capable of being read versus not. And it changes like the way that you look at a book fundamentally, like in incredible ways. And like I don't want to talk shit about something, but there's a book that I've been reading that like, it's so hard to get through because it's wrong. Like it visually hurts my eyes. It's an assault.
Yeah.
Whereas this, looking into this, like this is going to be easy to read because it looks right.
Yeah.
Mr. Mendelsohn did great with this.
Yeah.
Chad, I'm sure you have this all the time where you do have to sort of keep an eye on your page counts when you're printing.
Yeah, our 9,000 page books that we
and if you make the letting smaller and the print smaller, you can bring your page count down, and then the book will cost less.
Yep.
But some of these, dense, difficult works, if you set them really tight, it's just daunting.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. Like the levels of like why people read a book. So we talked a little bit about like the marketing of this as like being a great work of literature. You should read it because it's that, which is interesting and is something that like can appeal to a certain populace. It's also like the Book of Lisbon. It's like the idea of all these heteronyms, which I want to ask you about for a second, Brian, or in a second I'll ask you. But also like just the sheer way in which like someone picks up one of these books that is going to be difficult, like what the whole point of this podcast is. And if it looks too dense, they're gone. They're out immediately. Like immediately. And we've struggled with that a lot of trying to figure out that balance that you're talking about between page count and making things look too tight. Like Coffee House used to have, like when they did the Paul Metcalf books, I think it was Paul Metcalf books. Yeah. They were like the 3 volumes of like the hardcovers or multiple volumes of the hardcovers. And their print was so tight. And those books were like 800 pages, but they encompass like 7,000 pages of work under like normal printed circumstances. And those are books that I have a hard time like wanting to read. Same thing with like John Cheever's collected stories. The typeface on that is too dense.
Yeah. Yeah, I sort of remember those Metcalf editions.
Yeah,
the type may be small, having a lot of space on the page, though. Maybe because he's so experimental that there aren't always prose blocks. There's a lot of spacing.
That's a huge thing too.
Yeah,
Brian, I thought you would. Really
I sort of had this weird nostalgic thing for the mass market, like intensely tight. Like the Cheever collected stories in the mass market. I sort of have a weakness for those. My son started getting kind of interested in John Steinbeck, and I've been pulling all those old John Steinbeck books, those Penguin ones, and they're like you literally need like a microscope to read the text. But I sort of love it. I kind of love it. It brings it back.
Wasn't it this past weekend, Brian, we were making a joke about how no one reads John Steinbeck anymore?
Yeah, no, it was a shame. We were talking it was a shame. Yeah. It's good on your son. Good for him.
I thought that you, Brian, would love this book because of the heteronyms.
I'm very interested in that, yes.
Because you've created various personas.
Yeah, no, I'm curious how he's gonna work with his. They seem a lot more serious and and better than what I'm doing. So I'm really hoping to learn and grow. That's what we're all here for.
One thing related to that. So like if you're watching this or at any point in time, I assume that it shows that Brian's name is Doug, which is Doug Feldick, one of his characters that exists in the world as a writer and as the host of Rock in Your Mouth podcast about Rochester's food scene. But related to that, with the heteronyms, so Declan, you guys are publishing other books under the other heteronyms over what period of time? What's your scope for this project?
Well, Margaret and Patricia Ferrari, who is the editor who I mentioned before, brought this whole project to our attention. They're co-translating the Alberto Cairo. I think we're going to get the manuscript in at the end of December, and then we'll probably try and bring that out before Christmas next year.
Oh, next year. Okay.
Which will be, challenging, but I think we can do that.
And then you're doing other ones too, right?
Yeah. Then we're doing Ricardo Reis and Alvaro de Campos. So those are his three most famous ones.
Yeah, Ricardo Reis is one that people might know of too because of the Jose Saramago book. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He was sort of this. I guess I still have to learn more about these heteronyms, but I think Ricardo Reis was a sort of scholarly classicist who spent time over in South America and wrote these sort of Horatian poems. Alberto Cairo, the one that we're about to do, I think he was a shepherd.
Yes.
And he wrote these sort of pastoral writings. And he sort of considered the master among all the heteronyms. They all, refer to him. They're, big influence. And then Alvaro de Campos is sort of, I think, almost like a playboy guy. He was a naval engineer and traveled a lot, and he was sort of pompous.
Isn't he the one that makes fun of Ricardo Reis all the time? Or not all the time, but sometimes?
Maybe. I haven't really read them.
I believe it's those two that have like a conflict about their poetry, and because of their personalities, that one's like very scholarly and the other is like, whatever, playboy. Yes. And that they have arguments, like literary arguments among the heteronym texts. Yeah. Which is perfect. Which is all fodder for the next season of Rock in Your Mouth.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait. It's like a fun game.
Yeah, although this one,
Bernardo Suarez, actually, from the Book of Disquiet, they call him like a semi-heteronym because he was the most like Pessoa. Pessoa sort of considered himself, sort of more of an embodiment of his own self. And they had the similar career, lived in the same street, sort of saw life very similarly.
Is like the closest. It's weird to think about because like it's such a great game, and it's something that I don't think people do. Oh, you know who does do it nowadays is Antoine Volodine. Antoine Volodine has a series of heteronyms, like Manuela Drega, Lutz Bassman. There's another one that I'm forgetting that all have like a different sort of place within his like literary universe, and they write differently, and they have different like backgrounds and styles and philosophies and whatever else. But other than that, like, it's something that I think we've gotten away from. Like there's too much emphasis on autobiographical fiction nowadays that this sort of thing is not kosher or not like as widely accepted. Because like I mean, I'm at the same time that I'm reading this, I'm reading the last book of My Struggle, which is the exact opposite, which is like my thoughts on a page as me. Here's my life, and this is very much like, even though if it's a semi-heteronym, it's still like the idea of like someone I'm creating that's going to be the narrator, that's going to communicate in this universe of other narrators who have different viewpoints on what life is. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. I wish that we had more of that.
Yeah. And I like these books where it's unclear how much of the narrator is the author, like Enrique Villamatas is an example, or Sebald. I'm just quoting two authors that we publish, where there's this sort of unclear line between the person writing the book and this fictional character that they create.
The invented part fits into this too.
Excuse me?
The invented part by Rodrigo Frazan fits into this, that we did on this podcast earlier. Fits that same sort of bill where it's like a writer who seems to be a stand-in for Rodrigo, but really kind of isn't. Like certain things out of his name.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think that's probably a good place to stop, actually, unless you have anything. What's one last pitch line that you would give us to why we should stick with this next 8 weeks of reading this? What's your favorite section?
I don't know. I'd have I was actually reading parts of it rereading parts of it on the train ride in this morning, and they're one of the things that's kind of intense about it is that he lives life he observes so intensely, and the sections I was reading this morning are, you sort of think of him as sort of viewing almost like reviewing things so objectively that he sort of wants to take himself out of what he sees, but there's so much sadness, and there's a lot of like real intense depression in this, and it's almost like this nausea that he feels seeing life around him, and you think of him as the great writer of Lisbon, writing with these descriptive passages of the trams and the people going to work and the cobblestone streets and the flowers in the windows and the music of women singing out of the balconies. But it's a lot of times he's observing this with such deep sadness and intense despair, but it's beautiful too, and there are some incredible sections where that contrast is interesting. It's interesting to me, that contrast in Pessoa.
Absolutely. So we usually end with like a favorite line, but all we did read for this section for today were the two prefaces. But I think that there's a great piece of advice hidden in the middle of Margaret Jull Costa's preface, which begins, in 1907, his grandmother left him a small inheritance, and in 1909, he used the money to buy a printing press for the publishing house, Empress Ibis, which he set up a few months later. Empresa Ibis closed in 1910, having published not a single book.
I remember laughing.
The way to do it!
There you go.
But yeah, this is going to be fun. It's going to be a fun season. Next week, we'll be having Tom Flynn from Volumes Bookstore or Book Cafe back on, so he can get harassed and harass us. And we'll be talking about the first, I believe it's 30 pages. I didn't pull up the schedule, but it's not a ton. So if you're following along and you're listening to this podcast, get a copy of the Book of Disquiet, the New Directions version, and check the 3% website. And there's a reading list there of like what we're going to be talking about each week, and follow along, because I think this is going to be an interesting and very different season from what we've done before. I mean, similar to what we did with the short stories where we had like to figure out what to talk about. This is a novel that's not a novel. So like there's not the way that we went through Fox or Invented Part where we sort of figured out what was happening as it went along and sort of unpacked it. This is going to be a different sort of season. So please follow along. Listen to us on iTunes, rate us, review us. You can watch on YouTube and ask questions. And the same thing on GoodReads. If you have questions or comments or things that you like or don't like, that'll be really helpful, because it's going to be a interesting experience, I think, going through this book. And we plan to have on a lot of really great guests, ranging from translators to editors to people who are just Pessoa like nuts to everything. So it should be a lot of fun. Nothing else to add. So thank you, Declan.
Thank you, guys. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. You have fun driving again.
Oh yeah, nothing but fun.
Nothing but good driving times. Okay, so till next week, everyone.
Bye.
Espero-te como quem espera o futuro, sem ciência, só por adivinhação. Não sei se és tu quem procuro, mas é tarde para tu.